Never mind, go ahead.
Got it. Call to order the Wilsonville City Council work session on Monday, October 18th at 5:26 p.m. And we'll start with review of agenda and items on consent. Does anybody have any comments on that? Okay. And we'll move to councilor concerns. Not seeing or hearing anything there, and I'll note that Councilor Linville is excused. I also want to adjust something on my screen here. Just a minute. Okay, we'll start with our pre-council work session. Welcome staff member Mr. Pauly on the Frog Pond East and South Master Plan.
Good evening, Council. Good to be with you again. So we're here to talk the first of a number of conversations we'll have over the next year about the Frog Pond East and South Master Plans. Let me go ahead and start the presentation, share my screen here. Give me just a moment. As I do that, I want to introduce the project team that's with me tonight. Andrew Parrish with Angelo Planning. If he hasn't joined, will be joining momentarily. And so Angelo Planning Group, which has worked with us before on the Middle Housing Project, as well as the previous Frog Pond work, will also be our consultants on this. Many of you know Mr. Joe Dills. He's also involved in addition to Andrew. And so it's been good working with this team and look forward to continuing to work with them. Some other consultants that we've worked with before, including DKS and Associates, Murray Smith, who does infrastructure, and I'm forgetting the name of the firm, but the designers that worked with us before. I didn't have it written down, my apologies. So it's a great team. We look forward to working with them. Also, Central Cultural of Washington County, who helped with outreach with Middle Housing, is also part of the project team. All right, so we're looking at this from a lot of different angles. A lot of what will be included in the plan is similar to what's been included in other plans. We're going to look at land uses, the type and variety of housing, all the streets, trails, transit lines, parks, open space. We're going to look at the preservation of the Grange, which was called out in the previous area plan. Also going to look at infrastructure and funding strategies for infrastructure and how all this works together to support quality community design. A couple of things to point out as you look at the map image on this slide is what's around this area and how it interrelates to the areas around it. So to the west is the rest of Wilsonville, either developed or under development. But then on the north, east, and south is areas within the rural reserve, which will be an urban-rural interface for the foreseeable future. So your packet provides a background and regulatory research memo. I wanted to highlight a couple things from that. First is Wilsonville's strong history of residential master planning, which many of you are familiar with. And it's really a key aspect of the thoughtful planning that makes Wilsonville a great place. And so we're going to continue that legacy and build upon it through this project, and really looking forward to that. So a quick timeline, we're going to begin the story back in 2010, which is when Metro adopted the urban and rural reserves, which this was where Metro designated land that was expected to urbanize potentially in the next 50 years, as well as areas that were expected to remain rural for at least 50 years. The areas we're talking about were designated as urban reserves at that time. And moving forward in 2015, there was the neighboring area, which is now called Frog Pond West, which was already in the urban growth boundary. And so there was an area plan or concept plan drawn up and approved by the city that incorporated that area in the urban growth boundary as well as this urban reserve area. And following up on that in 2017 was the Frog Pond West Master Plan in the area that's now under development. A year after that, at the end of 2018, is when these urban reserve areas were actually added to the urban growth boundary. And as part of that, when Metro expanded the urban growth boundary in 2018, part of that requirement was to adopt a master plan within 4 years of that date, which puts us December of 2022. So that requirement is really driving a lot of our timeline at this point in terms of getting this work done. The Frog Pond Area Plan, a little bit more about that. And what I comment on that is it's really a starting point and a guide for this current planning effort, but does not box us in. Acknowledge that a lot of thought went into what resulted in the area plan, but we'll also be weighing new input and information that we get through this process. One of the key items is this desire to have a seamless look and feel of the this Frog Pond neighborhood, which includes east, south, and west, particularly in terms of connectivity and transportation. So you can, in the image on the screen, which shows is the land use plan from the area plan, you see Frog Pond Lane and 60th connecting through, having a continuous connection, other connections having, and then if you look more into the plan, you also see trail connections and really thoughtful of how these interrelate. And so that's an important aspect of it. Some other things that, if you look at this, the area plan is the concept of having a commercial center at the corner of Advance and Stafford. And so part of the scope of this project is to study that and see what size and what really makes sense for that corner. And we'll be doing that. And other key aspects, you'll notice a big swath of green, of lighter green. That's the Bonneville Power Administration power line easement. So there's already been discussion in our outreach of really being thoughtful. What can we do to maximize use of that land and make it really a thoughtful part of the community rather than just leftover land. There are a lot of limits on what can be done there, but it's come up multiple times already, really being thoughtful of how we use that large chunk of property. You'll notice that the area plan did talk about essentially what we call middle housing, particularly in near the intersection of Advance and Stafford. As required by state, middle housing will need to be allowed everywhere, but there'll be a lot of discussion of kind of an urban design, having a denser urban design potentially around there with kind of fanning it out into a less dense urban design towards those urban rural edges. You know, as we look at the key regulations and trends, you're all aware of middle housing and what's happened there. That will again come into play here, and that's why we've done the middle housing work really fairly early, related to some other jurisdictions to lay a foundation for the work, additional housing work we'll be doing here. The housing variety for a variety of people is really a key part of what we're doing. That comes from the state, but also from requirements related to the urban growth boundary expansion from Metro, as well as the city's own equitable housing strategic plan. Really thinking about this project was part of the action items of that plan. And so, again, building upon what we did with middle housing and how do we create a variety of housing in this area. There's a particular focus on accessory dwelling units and middle housing, again, with this project, but also there'll be additional thought given to infrastructure planning and funding and how that can work together to support a variety of housing and be flexible, particularly potentially with variable rate SDCs and fees to support different housing types. So part of the scope of this project is to be very thoughtful about that question. We look forward to engaging with the Planning Commission, Council, and the community on those questions. So with that, Andrew, I'm glad that you did make it there. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, again, Andrew Parrish with Angelo Planning Group, to talk more about some similarities and differences from Frog Pond West and previous planning work we've done.
Good afternoon, councilors. Sorry if I'm a little tardy. I was getting my kid home from her daycare, so you know how it is these days. Frog Pond West, I think as Dan has mentioned, has been kind of in the works for a while. And then Frog Pond East and South were planned alongside of it. So what are we planning on using from the previous planning effort, and what are we kind of cracking open again and looking at anew here? So from the previous effort, we're going to reuse the basic neighborhood structure. We think we did a good job of kind of making the transportation connections through the area, thinking of a lot of the bigger issues. We're still looking at mostly residential uses for Frog Pond East and South. We're looking at a pretty similar infrastructure funding method for Frog Pond East and South, so we may take a closer look at how some of the SDCs, the systems development charges, break down, and maybe what some of those implications might be for kinds of housing that the city's looking for, and just what their impacts are on the overall price of residential units. But we do want to keep our commitment to quality design, walkable neighborhoods, and tree preservation. I mean, it's sort of a new day as far as what mix of housing comes about from Frog Pond East and South, but we do want to keep the same level of, high quality development. It's just a really great addition to the city that the city of Wilsonville can be proud of. So what's different? The housing variety related to state requirements and the city's own stated goals, I think is going to be different from what we were looking at last time. We're going to look at infrastructure fees that have maybe a variable rate for smaller housing units, maybe paying less, more middle housing units maybe paying less, the kinds of things that the city wants to support and emphasize, relooking at their proportional share of the fees for their infrastructure. And we really want to do a good job of having broad outreach. We've got some folks on the consultant team, Centro Cultural, who were working with the city on their middle housing project. I think they did a great job with some of their focus groups. We want to do a pretty similar level of outreach for this effort. It's a little bit different because it's a greenfield situation, and so we've already touched base with a number of the folks who are property owners out there, who are neighbors out there, but we want to do a good job of folks who might be the people who end up buying houses out there. So that's kind of our intent.
Thank you, Andrew. I wanted to touch in on schedule. I mentioned that the metro requirement puts us having this done by December of next year. So that is overall a pretty tight schedule. So we've kicked it off. We've been working behind the scenes alongside as we finish up middle housing to get us to this point. Generally, we'll be For most of the project, we plan on coming to council for a work session every other month. It will get more frequent as we're talking about SDCs and finishing things up towards the end of next year. Kind of how we're thinking of this is one of the first steps, which is already underway, is working around exploring affordable housing needs, as well as encouraging accessory dwelling units. That work's underway by Eco Northwest, leading that effort. And that will really inform then these next steps about the residential sub-district planning and the mix and variety of housing, that together with additional outreach. At the same time, we're looking at kind of planning out the residential. We'll also be looking at the neighborhood commercial. That's followed up and overlaps some with public realm planning, which is talking about the street cross sections, the type of streets, street trees, signs, parks, all those important community elements. And then we'll move to taking all that concepts and putting it into the development code and planning documents, as well as the infrastructure plan, and then how we're going to pay for that infrastructure, then followed by the final adoption. So a lot to talk about, and we look forward to having those conversations with you, the Planning Commission, and the community over the next year. So to talk a little bit more about how the ideas behind outreach, I'm going to give it back to Andrew.
Thanks, Dan. So the way we have the project arranged currently is that the Planning Commission is the main recommending body of the project. So we're going to be doing a lot of focus groups and stakeholder meetings, and we're going to be using Let's Talk Wilsonville, outside events, as a method of informing the public about the project, getting feedback, and then the Planning Commission is the body that's actually going to be kind of digesting that feedback and giving recommendations to you, the City Council. We just spoke with the Planning Commission last week to kind of talk through this process with them. They seemed very interested in having robust community engagement. We're kind of working out what that schedule looks like over the next several months, and it seems like we're going to have some combination of kind of listening sessions and work sessions with the public at Planning Commission meetings, but that detailed schedule is kind of to be determined. And I suppose that we are interested in your input on what are the best ways to engage with folks about this specific topic. Are there any, I don't know, has the Let's Talk Wilsonville site worked well, or could be working better as far as you're concerned for some of these big planning projects? But we want to get this to have the broadest kind of level of input that we can, so that we can create the most publicly accepted and also the most kind of broadly equitable plan that we can.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And yeah, and we hope to engage the DEI committee on this as well as their schedule and work program allows. And really, we're trying to gather ideas from all around. We want to try a variety of new things with this outreach, and be it from staff, city council, wherever we can get ideas to get to the different communities we're targeting. We're interested in being effective and being thoughtful about different approaches. So a couple questions, we'll turn it over to you for further discussion, but the kind of next steps, we're going to be doing this additional outreach. The housing work's underway. That's really a big focus the next couple of months. And the next work session on schedule that we're planning is in January, which will be primarily focused on housing. So happy to answer any questions, hear your comments, and particularly if you have any comments about what the success of this project looks like for you. So thank you.
Thank you. I see one hand up, Councilor West.
Thank you. you. Couple thoughts. I can take my hand down here. A couple of thoughts here is, as I went through the packet and I looked at this, just with where it's located and as the population grows on that side of the city, like a health and safety concern I have is with, I know they're county roads, they're outside city limits, but as we develop and grow that direction, is there continued effort to address the major safety issues? We've had loss of life and accidents along those country roads nearby. I think those will get more crowded going forward. Is that part of this process as we kind of look at like the impact areas, even just right outside the city? Is my first question. And then my second one is there, I think I can be shot down, I'm just going to say it out loud, I don't know if it's even a possibility, is my question is like outreach-wise, and we want to get that word out there. There's two really large, well, especially like Wilsonville community page, to do an open forum to the community that way. Since COVID, things are still shut down, the library is not necessarily as open to the public, and doing like an open forum kind of educational meeting where there's already congregated a few thousand people in the community that live here that may be interested in if there's a way to partner with that group or not. Just thinking out loud, but those are my two main questions.
I have a question. When you say, are you talking about Let's Talk Wilsonville?
With Let's Talk Wilsonville, then there's all those there's a private page, the Wilsonville community page, where there's 5,000-6,000 people in the community that live there, and maybe doing some type of forum within that group that already has everybody congregated in one area, since it's a little challenging with COVID still, and we're all still so Zoomy in our meetings.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify what you meant there.
Yeah, that was just an idea.
And I would, so for our discussion today, because they did ask us for ideas about ways we could communicate, so that's one I'd like to hear back from people on that. Do you want to, I mean, I think that the communication plan, I guess, is going to be developed as you gather all these ideas. Is that right?
Yeah, we have a plan, a framework plan, but part of that is that we're adapting as we go and trying different ideas as well.
I see.
Part of it's the state and true things we know have worked on other projects, such as the focus groups and different stakeholder interviews, but also, we are setting up where we can try and evaluate new things as well. And
I just maybe to tie this back to some of the things we've already talked about, and I see Council President Ackerball has a comment too, but we have talked quite a bit in the past about how we are required by state law to build roads when we build new developments. And so could you talk a little bit about, I believe it's called congruence, and the methodology that the city of Wilsonville uses so the public can be aware of how we do that, so that, let's let you go into answering that, but I'd like to have it in the context of what is our practice and what is required also.
Concurrency is what you mean to say.
Concurrency. I knew I was going to do. So our practice of concurrency, and also what is required when you build new development with regard to roads.
Sure. So there's two parts of it. There's kind of the infrastructure master planning. So when we do a master plan like this, we look long-term of what the needs are, how it's going to impact the current and future system, and we plan out in the capital improvement project what improvements need to be made over time as it grows. I will note on the county side, because there are some major intersections impacted, such as 65th and Stafford, that's an ongoing conversation. City's already engaged with the county on that topic, and certainly that's part of the conversation here. There's already studies going on around that, and so that's actively being worked on. And then, so there's that master planning, capital improvement plan level. And then when development actually comes in the door, the requirement is that improvements to serve that development occur within 24 months, is what, to meet the standard operating level of service, and that's been our standard for a number of years, and anticipated to remain as such.
And those local roads are required to be built by the developer on the developer's
Correct.
dime.
Local roads are by the developer.
Right. So any overages, if there's anything that would be over and above and beyond our city standard, then that's where SDC credits or city kicking in might come into play.
And one other factor for the record, I'd like to ask you to add this to the notes as we communicate with people about how these things are done, is the road user fee with the license plate registration and how that fits into, I believe, a problem area like that 65th interchange and how we currently do and will need to continue to communicate with our colleagues at Clackamas County and even other cities in trying to get those resources to the county roads outside of our jurisdiction.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I think having more kind of concise documentation of what's being done around those key areas, particularly that one, would be helpful, so thank you.
I see Council President Ockervall has her hand up.
Sure, thank you. In your question about feedback and where we can be going to look at different methods of community feedback, I'm curious from staff's perspective. I know that a lot of things have moved virtually out of necessity in the last year and a half, 2 years, but our library is open. We do have people that can browse through the stacks now, and in fact, I believe we recently had a story time held in the park. So we're kind of looking at ways that we can, creatively get back to some of that programming that was happening before that is not in a virtual format. So I'm curious from staff perspective how having in the past, I know for other projects we've had information boards in the library, sticker boards, things like that. Is that something that we could bring into play with this project? And if it's on an easel, it could go to the park with the story time. It could move around to some of these opportunities when they pop up. We had recently the Harvest Festival in the park. Could, something, if we had those sorts of community events that are able to happen outside, can we have some of those information boards or sticker boards happen alongside with that? And then a question, I guess, so that's my kind of feedback piece. And then a question too, is when you reviewed the timing of this project, and I know December 2022 is going to come up quick, but how does that timeline, what is the timing, I guess, overall for this project? What does it look like in relation to housing needs analysis? And is there opportunities for any coordination between those two things?
Great question. So I'll first of all, on the tabling particularly, there's a lot of great stuff, for example, that I know you're aware of that we did with Town Center. So all those great things that we found work well there, from tabling to message centers at the library, are the sorts of things that we do plan on doing more of with it.
Great. Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the question about how it relates to housing needs, our last full housing needs analysis was in 2014. We've done some at a county level recently. Part of the reason why the scope includes a affordable housing needs analysis in particular, targeted at this area, is to get some of that updated information around needs, which will play into the project and what we're planning. And actually, right on the end of this in 2023, as we previously discussed in a grant request discussion, is we'll be moving into a housing needs analysis and housing production strategy right afterwards. So once this is approved at the end of 2022, that opens us, developers could come in, bring it in for development as soon as infrastructure, et cetera, can be built. So move kind of with the market and what can be done once this is approved. But we will be doing additional analysis of housing needs, both as part of this project, kind of focus on this project, and right afterwards, kind of citywide.
Yeah. So some of the housing needs that will be centered on this project will then be woven into the housing needs analysis that starts in 2023, so that those coordinate and, they're telling the same story, I guess, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
It will inform the next housing needs analysis.
Thank you.
I had one other thing of thinking about the communications, and I was in a meeting today with some various cities, all the Clackamas cities, basically. We all had a meeting about some information gathering, and one thing was brought up about the use of electronic media. It serves a certain function, doing surveys and things where you go online and provide your opinion. But it does leave out people who don't use that resource. And so I like the idea of some kind of a traveling board that could go to things like story time. And I also wanted to ask you to consider going to sporting events that we have in our parks, maybe even our schools, where you've got families. It could be a kid's soccer game. It could be an adult soccer game, where people are gathered and you have a chance to ask them to provide input there. So just looking at different modes of communicating so we don't only limit ourselves to electronic.
Right.
And then I had a question. I know we're at the beginning of this, but can you elaborate a little bit more on if ADUs have right now we do allow ADUs. Last I heard we had 10, and maybe there are a couple more applications coming in, but what's different about the ADU focus in these two neighborhoods? Is it that you're encouraging builders to start with those?
Right, it'd be about encouraging. So, because we've seen a couple, most of, off the top of my head, I can think of of the dozen or so ADUs we have, I think one was a new build, where they built the house and the ADU at the same time. Most of them have been additional, adding the ADU to the property. So what are those barriers to developers building those with a new single family home?
Thank you.
And then I know that consultants have already been talking to developers about talking through what are some of those barriers and what maybe could be done to remove some of those barriers and encourage them.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
Okay, I do. I've figured out the raise hand. There it is. Okay, now I raised it. Now I'll lower it. I just wanted to make a couple of comments in terms of sort of contextual background. That Mr. Pauly did a good job of giving us some background, but he didn't go quite as far back, perhaps, as we need to put this in perspective, and that is with the urban-rural reserves and that whole process. When they looked at all of this land, and we're talking about from the Willamette River clear up to Lake Oswego, Stafford. It's agricultural, but it was never foundational agriculture. Well, I mean, it wasn't at that time and hasn't been for a long time. It's more hobby farms or minor farming operations. It's not industrial ag like you see south of the Willamette. So that was a significant difference. And part of the reason that this whole area, the Frog Pond area and everything up to Ellickson, was really in the crosshairs to be industrial land, industrial expansion for the Portland metro region. And the city of Wilsonville and our significant neighborhoods, certainly Landover and Meadows, with the assistance of Sharp Charbonneau came forward and made the case to Metro that we couldn't handle industrial in this area, and we were fine with it being residential, but not industrial. And the reason for that is industrial is almost always, but pretty much always means trucks. And trucks coming down Wilsonville Road going to the Wilsonville interchange was unacceptable, coming past the high school, past the primary school, past the library, on into our downtown. We started looking like Tualatin. No aspersions on them. But we didn't want to add to the truckload into those existing neighborhoods and commercial districts. So that was kind of the agreement that we made as a community, was yes, we can support residential and we can support good urban residential here. We can't handle industrial. We will handle all the industrial you need in the northwest quadrant. So that's Basalt and Coffee Creek. That was that agreement. So we're part of a kind of a regional agreement here that we can't do industrial over here in Frog Pond because of the truck traffic. We will handle that over there, but we will do residential, and we'll do excellent residential, at least most of the way up Stafford, so that any industrial or truck generating things would be closer to Ellickson and using that interchange, not coming down to Wilsonville Road. So that's kind of the background. This didn't just come up one day when somebody wanted to put in a subdivision. This is a long community discussion and regional discussion that we are part of. So I just want to add that contextual thing.
I think I'm glad that you brought that up, and not only was it a discussion, as I understand it was a very engaged, challenged discussion to resist the idea of building industrial there.
Yes, I mean, we had 400, 500 people showing up at the Holiday Inn to testify from these neighborhoods and from Charbonneau, and the two neighborhoods were supporting each other, that we couldn't do industrial development south of the Willamette, and we didn't want to do it in Frog Pond either, but we would definitely take on our share and more in the northwest part of Wilsonville.
Thank you. Councilor West, I just saw your hand up. I'm trying to spot these hands up.
We're getting used to them. So quick question. Well, one, Councilor Han, thank you for that context. That's really valuable and mindful. I appreciate it. And that's really good history to know. Well, quick question, back to your wanting feedback on ways to reach out to the community. Do we have, I guess, I mean, we must, but do we have the budget to be a little more nimble and flexible than we were even with the town center outreach, given the circumstances we're in and the current climate? And does that kind of, do we have the ability to do a multi-prong attach from reaching people, have the resources to reach people that don't necessarily apply to surveys online and things like that, or that aren't necessarily like going to be at the library to see the reader board, or, but do we have an ability to kind of do a shotgun approach? Oh, and do we have the budget for that, or do we need to try to look for resources to get that done?
I would say we've dedicated a good chunk of budget to outreach that allows us to try a variety of strategies to reach people where they are, and particularly those groups that have been historically underrepresented.
Are you welcoming emails from us over the next few days or so on if we get a brilliant idea on how to.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Please,
Well,
please do. And we kind of a parking lot, if you will, except they're not going to stay there very long, kind of a brainstorming of different ideas that we can sort through as a team and really to think through how to best engage. We have a lot of great ideas, a lot of things that have worked, a lot of good ideas from the project team, but we welcome additional ones as well.
I just realized that I misspoke. The set of meetings I went to today was actually Washington County cities, not Clackamas. They kind of blend together. But one of the, and it reminded me though, that the idea of going to people in person, I heard the consultant mention working with the organization that I believe is called Centro Cultural. In this outreach, are you considering basically connecting with organizations who would then take that information we would give them and reach out to their members so that it's not just the city needing to get directly to each person, but you could go through various networks that are customized?
That's a possibility that's occurred to us. Well, more than a possibility, something that's certainly to reach out to particularly these different groups. That's a good way to go. So, yeah.
Okay.
And yes, Centro Cultural is on our team for outreach. So they're going to continue to use the practices that they have used well in Washington County and also for previous projects for the city of Wilsonville.
Great, thank you.
They have their digital, but also, I mean, as things allow, they're fans of tabling events and such as well.
Great. So, did we adequately cover this topic?
Yeah, that's great. If you have any other ideas about what success looks like, what you envision out here, what's on top of your mind, please feel free to share that with the team, either with a phone call or email as well.
I just have one quick follow-up for Councilor West and maybe others. The Wilsonville community page, just for my own personal edification, is that a Facebook page? Is that where does that live?
Yeah, it's a Facebook.
It's a Facebook page, and I don't know how that would. It's just an idea because there's so many people just there already, but it is private, so I don't know how like a public meeting notice laws or whatever how that would work. I don't know, but it's a lot of people in one spot that would reach a potential forum, and it's just an idea. It may not be feasible, but
we can at least notice the meeting there, you know.
Yeah, absolutely notice the meeting.
And I know Bill Evans gets information out on that page regularly, so
he does. And so I know I think the spokesman is included into that page too. So it might be a great resource to consider.
Yeah.
I was going to add one more thing. I'm thinking you reminded me of during the ice storm when we were really working hard at getting consistent, accurate information out to people. One of the things that we were advised and learned is if we could refer people to a city source so that it would always be accurate, then people would know to go there. And so I just wanted to reiterate that in emergency services planning, which is this isn't what we're doing with housing, but the more that we can let people know, go to this site for what we're doing, that would help us in a number of different ways. But we do need to find multiple ways to connect with people who are not presently going to those sites.
Yes.
Agreed.
Okay, so thank you for that topic. And now we're going to move to the solid waste collection rate report review. And that will be with Mr. Ottened. Have a refreshing new topic.
Good evening, Mayor Fitzgerald, members of City Council. I'm going to start screen sharing here. I'm the Public and Government Affairs Director, and I will be joined by Chris Bell, CPA, Collins Associates Incorporated. Chris Bell is our solid waste rate review consultant, and tonight we are presenting the results of the 2021 solid waste collection rate report that is scheduled for adoption next month via resolution number 2931. Tonight's City Council presentation will go over the 2021 rate review process and the results, as well as the City Council preference for our proposed rate modifications and services. And Chris Bell will take the next set of slides here.
All right. Apologize, I had that on mute. Can you hear me okay? All right, the annual solid waste rate review is a review of a cost report. Every hauling company within the Portland metropolitan area generates a report that they submit to the jurisdictions they provide service with. And in that report is their prior year's performance in that particular jurisdiction. And so part of that rate review, or part of what I do for the city, is review that information to look and make sure it's reasonable given the operations that they're doing. I look at the cost report, making the adjustments to that report, project results for the current year. And in this year, we also looked at some additional services that were being provided that we talked about in the previous rate review and discussion with City Council, and make rate recommendations. So for 2020, which was kind of an unusual year because of the statewide shutdown and the pandemic, we did see a performance that was a little bit higher than initially expected. Residential, or roll card, which is primarily residential, saw a rate of return over 13%. Commercial container was just under 15%, and drop box was just under 20%. The overall composite was 16.2%. And to keep this in consideration, when the city sets rates, we usually set for a target of 10%. And if the haulers come in between 8 and 12%, depending on where they're at, we may look at adjusting rates whether they're up or down. So in this case, it came in at 16% for the prior year. And when we look at the 2021 rates, we take in consideration what we currently know. And in this year, 2021, one of the aspects that we found out, which was pleasant, is that the value of recyclables has gone up. And what that has done is that decreased significantly the cost of processing, and which has greatly provided it'll increase the rate of return, and we'll get into how that's going to impact the ratepayers going forward. But we also have some other considerations too, costs that we're going to increase. Driver wage, Republic is a union shop, and therefore they have regular wage increases. Administrative wages were increased a little too. Health insurance for regular workers, we estimate at 5%. Inflation overall is projected at 4.5%. Fuel, although it's diesel is up 20 to 35%. Fuel for Republic Services is a little bit lower because most of their trucks that they're collecting within the city of Wilsonville are running on compressed natural gas. So the overall impact has been substantially lower than diesel fuel. And solid waste disposal has increased by 3.3% from the prior year. So the projected performance, again, with those numbers that previously discussed, we're looking at 16%, 20%, and a 19% for the different lines of business. So an overall composite of 18.4%.
Now, in 2019, the City Council started to enact several special bulky waste and recycling services, in part to provide new community services that would also, in effect, increase the expenses for Republic services and decrease the margin or the rate of return, so as to bring it back down to the 8 to 12% range as desired. These programs bulky waste pickup for ADA senior citizens, business fluorescent tube and battery recycling, residential and commercial polystyrene collection, the Metro Commercial Food Waste Program, and Public Works Department street sweeping disposal. And I'll go through each of these items briefly. Regarding the residential food scraps collection program, that's a permanent, ongoing program that started in March of 2020. It's proven to actually be rather popular for single-family residences, and the city has now had inquiries from multifamily communities, a condo community, for example, that's interested in now participating in the food scraps program. And I'll note that the Wilsonville Metro Community Enhancement Program, the CE program, has the compost bucket projects, which is now underway, giving away 500 compost buckets to residents to participate in the food scraps recycling program. The bulky waste pickup for senior citizens was a limited duration program based on our popular bulky waste days. However, what we found was that there was relatively low real demand by seniors who would not otherwise be able to move items to the bulky waste disposal. We had a certain amount of residential remodeling occurring during COVID, and it turned out to be a nice way to get rid of a bunch of appliances at no charge, while still maybe being an older person, perhaps. And we did have some commercial businesses that tried to get in on the act, but they were not allowed. And some residents just said they used the service because it was free. So it may be that we might want to look at other methods to help seniors pick up bulky waste than perhaps through this particular program. Regarding the business fluorescent tube and battery recycling program, this was also to be a limited duration program. However, it was paused in 2020. It was modeled on a prior community enhancement funded program that we did in 2016. But what happened was basically between the COVID-19 interrupting business calls or calls on businesses, the county staff who support our city staff were called on to wildfires with the Emergency Operations Center. And then the city economic development staff turnover also stymied our ability to get out and market this program. So when we bring on our new ECDev manager, we'll be able to restart this program, and we have $10,000 worth of boxes stored at Republic Services ready to roll. Regarding the residential and commercial polystyrene, also known as styrofoam, this was a pilot program to gauge community interest. The clean styrofoam is processed by Agilix and Tigard. However, much of the styrofoam was not clean. A high percentage of contamination, dirty, broken, inappropriate type of styrofoam, actually also garbage. And so it was fairly expensive for labor costs to bag and sort out the garbage, unfortunately, from the collection station that was established at Republic Services operation on Ritter Road. The Metro Commercial Food Waste Program, the phase one for large generators such as Safeway and Fred Meyer was postponed by 2 years from commencing in March 2020 to March 2022 tentatively. I will note that most large generators in Wilsonville, like Fred Meyer and Safeway, already voluntarily participate in this program and remove their food scraps from the garbage stream. Phases 2 and 3 for smaller generators are also pushed back additionally another couple years in phases. Finally, we had hoped that there might be an opportunity for our Public Works Department to dispose of street sweepings and leaves through Republic Services. However, the corporate headquarters did not want to take on additional, essentially, DEQ regulations and potential liability. So that particular program did not work out. Chris will now take over on giving us some recommendations.
Yeah, after reviewing the performance of the the diversion programs, especially the ones that we requested Republic to add in as a means to buy down the rate of return. I'd recommend not continuing those programs for two reasons. Number one, because they're very expensive compared to how much material they diverted. So rather than trying to move those around, the better approach is going to be to adjust the rates down to accordingly. Excellent. This table here kind of shows you the overall cost for each one of these programs that we're recommending to not continue on. It would be the senior bulky waste collection, the commercial battery and fluorescent tube recycling, and then the residential and commercial styrofoam and polystyrene program. These are the three that we would recommend not continuing. With that in place, we're looking at adjusting the rate because we'd like to achieve a margin between 8 and 12%, and we usually set those rates at a target of 10%. And so with the projected performance being at 18.4%, it's time to adjust the rates back down to 10%. So with that, over the last few years, with that margin being over 12%, Republic's earned over that margin, that each other 12 or 10%. So when we look at this, there's always that risk that if we set the rates down, that we would have to adjust them up, and that may be the case. However, over the last couple of years, Republic has done very well doing business within the city of Wilsonville.
We may note, in part, the city has continued to grow. The cost of adding one new residential customer is incremental. However, that becomes a new ongoing source of revenue. Our business community has continued to grow also during the pandemic. As Chris had noted, the recycling markets did an amazing recovery this year. In fact, a substantial portion of Republic Services revenue is actually from recycling revenue. And then finally, as Chris noted, the CNG, when the city encouraged Republic Services to move over to CNG a few years ago, and they did, that has resulted in dramatic cost savings compared to had they stayed on diesel fuel.
So with that, this table summarizes the expected decreases for each line of business. So what we're recommending is the removal of the recycling surcharges. If you recall, last year we recommended cutting it in half, and this year we're recommending doing away with it. In addition, some of these services, some of the higher end services, we're recommending a rate decrease for roll cart, container, and drop box service. So, for example, the cart rate return, the cart rates right now, would recommend removing that recycling surcharge for every customer, and for the 35, 65, and 95 gallon cart customers, recommend a modest decrease, whether it's 7 cents for the 35, 60 cents, or 90 cents for the bigger containers. And this is based on a portion of the rate already. And the same method holds true for the commercial containers also. The higher the higher the rate, the bigger the discount, obviously. And again, removal of the $12 surcharge. And same with Dropbox, having a rate decrease for the for the bigger containers. Right now, if we reduce that rate, the current rate below. In this case, for the drop box of the 20-yard, it'd be below the cost of service, and it'd be being subsidized by another line of business. So that's why those smaller containers are typically already priced at below the cost of service. So reducing those even more puts a bigger burden on the other lines of business and the other services provided.
So a questions really that staff need from the City Council right now are three basic questions. Would you agree that we should modify the rates as recommended in the solid waste rate review for residential, commercial, and industrial customers? Do you agree that we should eliminate the temporary recycling surcharge? And finally, do you agree with the recommendation to not continue the additional bulky waste and recycling services that were enacted in 2019 and 2020? We welcome your feedback and questions at this point. Thank you.
So I'm looking at the hands up. I want to give everyone a chance to comment here. So I'll start with Councilor West, and then I'll look to the other councilors.
Thank you, Your Honor. I do agree, actually, with all of your guys' your proposed services and modifications. I am really concerned about the economic outlook, and to see that we may have an opportunity to lower rates for consumers. I think it's going to go a long ways, especially when people are going to start seeing and have seen, because of inflation, their utility bills climb, and not necessarily this utility bill, but the other one, so where we can save residents money in their pocketbooks, I think is fantastic. I have a quick question, and is, do we offer paint recycling or anything like that at our Republic Services? And if we don't, is that a service that might be considered is to the recycling of that type of product or paint? Is my other question.
I know that the state, and I'm not well versed, has the statewide paint program where you can take it back to to where you purchased it. So I'm not. Mark, you want to talk about that?
Well, Metro does offer recycled and paint services. At this point, you take it to Metro South. However, I can inquire with Republic Services if that is a service that they can offer. So I would check into that, Mayor, Councilor West. Thank you.
Thank you. Along those lines, I was talking to some other elected officials about some of these things and other people in this industry, and understand that there are some things like the paint pickup that was just mentioned that it looks like we maybe could add in Wilsonville. So, and that would be, right now I've recycled paint. You do have to drive over to Oregon City and drop it off, and that's another car on the road. If you can do it here, it's that much easier. I had a question about the market for the recycling. So it's gone up dramatically. We know that there was the international relations that got in the way of some of the recycling, and if you remember back when some of our local paper plants actually went out of business because they weren't able to get the things changed in paper recycling. They weren't able to get rid of paper, and they weren't able to get recycled material to use. Various things seem to have changed in the recycled market right now. And what I wanted to know is, do we know if some of these gains in the recycling market are sustainable and will continue for the next year? Can you tell us anything about the life of that great resurgence in that market?
Well, there's two things. When China stops taking and I'll call it baled garbage, because a lot of that material that a lot of recycling had a lot of contaminants. When they stopped doing that, what it did is it forced the domestic market to take a look at what they were doing, what they're accepting, and actually retool. So there's been a lot of building over the last 2 to 3 years domestically, especially in the Pacific Northwest, on paper mills, because we have a lot of material. So up in Longview, NORPAC, for example, converted a substantial amount of their plant to taking the mixed paper, or the mixed waste paper that we get from recycling. The other aspect is the plastic markets, which is interesting because you're seeing a lot of these bigger users of plastic bottles. For example, Nestle, Coke, and Pepsi are coming down and saying, we are going to make a commitment to make 10 or 15 or 20% of their packaging using recycled content. the problem was when they started mandating or starting up that policy is there wasn't enough domestic capacity for that. So that's why the value of plastic has really increased, because the producers of those materials are requiring or requesting, or a combination of both, to have recycled content. So the outlook is favorable for long term. I've got a colleague that I contact on a regular basis, and he is typically he's kind of gloomy about it, but he's been very optimistic about it. So I think it's going to be there. It's not going to say we're not going to have dips and such, but I don't think it's going to be as bad as it was a couple of years ago when China stopped taking all of the material. I think our domestic market has started to stabilize, and as demand has increased, so has the price.
That is really exciting. I was working in Oregon City when that recycling market shut down, and it's amazing how fast the paper plants had to go out of business. So, Council President Offerval.
Thank you. Feedback from me, I would say yes, the rate reduction makes sense, as well as terminating the recycling surcharge. I saw in the packet in your presentation, had some conversation, I guess, follow-up clarification on that earlier today about the deeper discounts for the different size units. I appreciate more information about that you've shared this evening, as well as the deeper discounts for the commercial. However, I suppose that does make sense with those areas also having the bigger margins that we were seeing too. So I think all of that makes sense. In your report, you referred to the pause for the fluorescent tube and the battery recycling program, and I guess I do have to say that we've already committed the resources, which I understand are now with Republic Services. So I would like to see the completion of that pilot, since we have committed those resources and the full reporting on that program. I think that would make sense, since that's something the council decided to look into. So I'm not saying that I guess pilot needs to be refreshed or renewed, but it should be completed. And I wonder if it doesn't make sense, as it is administered, that we're also including education on the importance of proper disposal for those items. So whichever way it takes in the future, that just our general public is more aware of the importance of properly disposing those. And in the future, it would be interesting to look at perhaps some expansion of different recycling programs. I think that's a different conversation. You mentioned the interest in composting at the multifamily areas and homes, and that seems like something that could be interesting in looking into. But I understand that is likely a separate conversation from ours this evening, when we're looking at the rate reductions and what the immediate future is for those pilots that we did. So thank you.
Thank you, Council President Offerval. Councilor Lehan. I think you're still muted.
Sorry. I think the program looks good, generally speaking. I did want to add, though, on battery recycling, since I host travelers a lot, people are perplexed about putting batteries in the trash. For all of our recycling, which is better than most places, travelers, especially international travelers, are accustomed to you don't put batteries in the trash. So it's just a feedback I get from people who are from other places where that's unacceptable. Anyway, but otherwise looks like good changes.
Well, thank you, Councilor Lehan and everyone, I would say to answer all of these questions, I also agree. I think it's incumbent on us to reduce the charges. We are midway through the year, and we don't know what the future will hold, but it looks like there's a good chance that some of these savings will continue because of the move to the compressed natural gas fuel and the success of the domestic recycling market, I guess you would call it. And this is a good time to reduce rates. There's always a good time to reduce rates. Let's take it.
Well, very good. Mayor, City Councilors, we greatly appreciate your feedback, and we will check in on the question that Councilor West raised, and also regarding Councilor Ackerval. Yes, we will certainly look to the opportunity to distribute the existing battery and fluorescent tube recycling boxes to businesses, particularly when we fill our economic development manager position. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I believe that covers everything we have for the work session. So we will adjourn the work session and we will reconvene our regular city council meeting at 7 p.m. Meeting adjourned.